Greetings to you all. My name is Benjamin Ferencz, and I'm speaking to you from Delray Beach, Florida, on the 22nd of October, 2019. I want to thank the sponsors of your event for having invited me to share some thoughts briefly with you regarding the topic I understand you're discussing, and that is the legacy of the London Charter. My own experience with the issue of trying to create a more humane and peaceful world goes back to my earliest days as a student at the Harvard Law School when I did the research for a book by a professor on a book on war crimes. My experience during the war, once the war broke out, was as a combat soldier who landed on the beaches of Normandy and went through the battles, all the battles from the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line and the final battle of the war, at the end of which I was an investigator in the Army of looking for evidence of war crimes, and I entered many concentration camps liberated by the Army of General Patton, who was my commanding officer, and I saw the horrors of war firsthand, with the dead bodies lying on the ground, begging with their eyes, with anything, for a little help, the crematoria still going, and a horror which is indescribable and incredible to a rational human mind, and which, of course, has never left me. So I've spent the rest of my life trying to create a more humane and peaceful world. And now, since I am soon entering my 100th year, I'm trying to limit my traveling, and I ask to be excused for not joining with you, just to give you my observations of the overall picture today. The London Charter was a very serious effort to create a rule of law which would govern the conduct of states and individuals to prevent any future recurrence of the type of atrocities which I personally witnessed in World War II. You will recall from the excellent biography of Justice Jackson done by John Barrett that Jackson was a principal mover in shaping of the London Charter. His goal, of course, was to establish a permanent rule of law which would in future prevent the type of atrocities which had occurred during the Nazi period. I was much influenced by Jackson's opening remarks as well as his conduct of the trial. I left Germany at about that time. I was still in the Army when the trials began. When I got home, I soon found that my wartime experiences were not of any value to a beginning lawyer. I had passed the bar exam and finished my gotten my Harvard degree just when the war broke out. And I was invited to go back to the Pentagon, and they wanted to recruit me to be a war crimes investigator of the 12 additional trials which was planned after the Jackson trial, as I call the International Military Tribunal. And it was in that capacity, really, that I personally witnessed all of the horrors of World War II, the incredible, unforgettable pictures of dead bodies lying all on the ground, pleading for help with their eyes in crematoria, surrounded by mounds of bones packed up like cordwood waiting to be burned. The absolute starvation of the inmates and all of that, which had a tremendous traumatic effect on me. I didn't quite realize it until in retrospect I look back at my life and I see that everything I've been trying to do since that time has been to create a more humane law, humane rule of law, which would protect people regardless of their race or creed, with fundamental human rights enforceable by an independent international tribunal. That was my theme when I was the chief prosecutor in the Einsatzgruppen subsequent trial, which convicted 22 defendants of killing over 1 million people as members of these extermination squads. So that, of course, had a great traumatic effect on me. And I've written many books, all of which are available free on my website, which is my name, benferenz.org. And I recommend that you read them or see the latest movie, which is a Netflix picture called Persecuting Evil, the life of Ben Ferencz, something like that. And you can have all of the information there. But the bottom line of all of this is, of course, we have failed miserably in our attempt to create a more humane and peaceful world. Most of the nations of the world signed on. The big powers were reluctant. The United States has been in the lead in opposing any effective international criminal tribunal. So the hope of Justice Jackson that the United States would lead the world in showing that it was possible to create the rule of law for people who committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'm sorry, dear Justice Jackson, we haven't done very well. We've made some progress, significant progress. We do have an international criminal court, which was very difficult to create. I was invited to do some opening remarks when that court was being debated in Rome before the statute was accepted. I was invited to do the closing remarks, some closing remarks, when the first trial came to an end. And I did all of that with no official capacity whatsoever. No one can fire me because nobody hired me, and I am not for sale. I call the shots as I see them, and I'm ashamed of the position taken by the United States, not following Jackson's urging and tradition. And it has been not only the current administration, where you have a John Bolton who gets out and says we don't need international law. There is no such thing as international law. We have the power. We should use the power. And if anybody disagrees, well, you just let them show that they can't push us around. That has been the position of a lot of people in the United States, which has encouraged politicians to be very cautious in supporting any new tribunal which might try Americans for crimes. So we live in a time when it has not yet become a reality, despite all of my efforts as well, to have the world change and recognize that war is no longer a useful asset in any international relations. President Eisenhower had recognized that. He was the supreme commander in World War II. And he said, in a very real sense, the world can no longer rely on force. If civilization is to survive, it must rely on the rule of law. That was an echo of Justice Jackson's argument. And any round table which is considering what happened to the London Charter, which set forth all these principles in somewhat detail, somewhat always leaving a few loopholes to make it acceptable. And the loopholes, of course, were seized upon. Everything is being fought in self-defense, because self-defense, of course, was an inherent right. How you define aggression, for example. You can't punish somebody for aggression if you haven't defined the crime. The United States fought against that definition, no matter what came up forth. I sat through all the meetings, hundreds of diplomats arguing to try to define one word, aggression, and they always came up with some kind of an excuse. It wasn't good enough. The United States never put on the table an acceptable definition. Finally, I came to the conclusion personally that we have to go for condemning crimes against humanity. It's what they are. Nothing is more inhumane than law itself. All wars are genocidal. Those are things I condemned as a prosecutor. I wish they were being followed everywhere, but unfortunately, there's a lot of young people who agree with me all around the world. I'm overwhelmed by their letters of approval. But the guiding powers, particularly now in the United States. John Bolton has been kicked out, fortunately, but there are echoes of the people who believe in his point of view, and they must be respected if you can't agree with them. I don't agree with them. They're entitled to be heard in a democracy. But when will the world wake up? In a time when we now have the capacity from cyberspace to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. That means that everybody will be killed on this planet. And the Russians can do it, and the Chinese can do it, and the Americans can do it. I don't know who else is going to do it. And as long as you have that possibility, you have to be very careful that you're not going to have a chance to use it, because the moment you use it, it's goodbye, kids. I'm not concerned with my life. I'm on the verge of reaching 100 years now, and I'm concerned with the life of the young people in the future. They've got to say, hell no, we won't go. We're not wasting more money on billions of dollars to build armaments to kill more people when we need that money to help more people whose desperation leads them to do acts of what we call terrorism. It's desperation. That's the world in which I live, the world in which you live, and if you don't change it, I don't think you'll live to be 100. I don't know if I will either, but I think I'll probably make it. So I wish you all the very best of luck and regret that I can't be with you. Goodbye.